Tell me, what was the film Tommy about to tell the viewers?
Tommy,
Yeah.
well, Tommy was
Based on.
was based on an album
Yeah.
that Pete Townsend had written, and it was a story of a deaf, dumb, and blind boy. But the deaf, dumb, and blind boy was really only a vehicle. It was really only a vehicle for him to put through the message of enlightenment, and so on one level, it was quite a dramatic narrative, but on the other level, underneath it, it was pointing towards enlightenment, discovery of oneself, your sensibilities, etc., etc. And it became. And the other point about it was, the album didn't really have. It had different songs, and it followed a storyline, but it didn't really. It left it to the listener's imagination. There wasn't really a direct narrative in that sense. So once the film was scripted, Stigwood got Ken Russell, who was then in those days he was a brilliant, unpredictable director, and he got Oliver Reed, Anne Margaret, Jack Nicholson, who wasn't a great star. That he became a great star, but he wasn't so great in those days. He wasn't such a big name. And that was our movie. And Roger Daltrey played the part of Tommy. So, and the film was extraordinary because it had no dialogue. It was all singing. So we had a real problem with Columbia Pictures because when we went to premiere it, it was essential that this was played loud. And we got Dolby in, and they set up a great sound system for the premiere in Los Angeles and New York. But in those days, a lot of the people who were running Columbia were of the older generation. So they didn't really totally get what this was really about it being sonic and the sound having to be up and loud, So they were forever, during the premiere, were forever asking the projectionist to turn the sound down, and I'm going back there telling him to turn it up. So it was up, down, up, down. And of course, we didn't get the perfect sound we wanted in some of the smaller cinemas in the outlying secondary markets because they just weren't built that way.
Cool, right.
But we had fantastic success with this film. And this was a film for the hippie generation. It was for the acid freaks and the hippies, and it was the post-Vietnam generation. It was a film for, in the wake of all the protest songs of Bob Dylan and so on, that's where it's set. Much later, we made another movie, which again was a conceptual piece written by Pete Townsend, and I produced that, and it was a movie of Quadrophenia, which was a totally different subject matter, and a subject matter that was touched more on ourselves and the real world and reality, So anyway, we made Tommy, and there's all this infighting going on between Kit and Chris. What happened then was all of our income streams were frozen. So the band said to me, what do we do? So I said, well, there's only one thing you can do. We go and tour and get some cash in, get some cash flow. So we went and toured Europe, and then we went to America. And that sustained them over the next 2 years. And it enabled us to go forward. And also, in the wake of that, I always wanted to be involved in films. So, and I guess they did, So we bought part of Shepperton Studios, which is where we based them. I was always based here in Soho, management-wise, but they based down in Shepperton Studios. And our plan was to make a lot more movies. Anyway, then Kit became quite in bad shape with the drugs and so on. And he had an accident, fell down the stairs in his mother's house, and he had a brain hemorrhage and he died. But he was out of it by then, he wasn't involved with us so much. But he was still he still had contractual rights and was getting income. And Chris went off to live in New York. So we just went forward and carried on going forward, and we had quite a few successful albums and lots of successful tours. But we also made an album called Quadrophenia, and this was in 73. And it was about a young boy who was typical of all of us. It was a composite of the way we grew up as mods. And it was about Jimmy, a young boy who is in a gang of mods. He's searching for his identity. He's pretty fucked up. He's a teenager. He's pretty fucked up. He's struggling to find some sort of direction and identity in amongst everything that's happening. He suffers all of the same travails that we all do in life, you know. He gets the elbow from his girlfriend. This happens, that happens. He becomes completely, whereas he begins with the ethos that it's one for all and all for one, he goes through this journey and he comes out the other end really disillusioned, completely disillusioned with his friends and the idol or the role models that he had. He sees through them because one of the role models is a character called Aceface. And he goes back down to Brighton, which was the scene of one of the big climax moments in the film. The bank holiday weekend when they clash with the rockers and lots of different stuff happens. And he sort of idol worships this guy Aceface, which by the way was played by Sting.
I was going to ask you, yeah.
And
not a bad cast, though.
Yeah, well, and he sees that Sting's working, Aceface is working as a bellboy in the hotel, the Grand Hotel in Brighton. So all of his belief about how sharp this guy was and how he was anti-establishment, there he is running around carrying people's suitcases. So he's completely devastated by that. You know, that is the last straw. But when you say casting, everybody in that movie was an unknown. I'm trying to remember the girl, Patsy Pollock was the casting director. And they were all unknown. And in fact, the director was unknown, Frank Rodham. And the guy I made the film with, Roy Baird, who was a really experienced filmmaker, and I learned so much from him. He made films with Alan Parker, with Oliver Reed, with Ken Russell, all kinds of people. We looked at a TV film. It was called Dummy, and it starred a girl called Geraldine James. And it was based on a true story, and she played the part of a deaf and dumb girl who was exploited and raped, partly because of her affliction, and that the perpetrator of the rape saw her as easy game, and she kills him. And it was based on a true story, and I thought it was a remarkable piece of TV. So what we did was we got hold of Frank Rodham. He turned out to be a young, sharp guy from Newcastle. So Quadrophenia was his first film. And he did a fantastic job. And just following on from Frank Rodham, you know, he went off to Hollywood to much acclaim, and he made a film called The Lords of Discipline, which was a great book, but they destroyed the film. The studio edited it, chopped it, and it just totally devastated him. And he came back, and he was disillusioned, and then he came up with a little bit of a concept for television, which did really well, which was called Auf Wiedersehen, Pet. And then he followed that up with MasterChef. So we don't need to do a benefit for Frank. He's doing very well, thank you.
He has, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's doing great, and I saw him recently, and he's doing fantastic. So anyway, coming back to the casting, we decided that the star of the movie was Quadrophenia, the work. So we didn't need stars. So not like we did with Tommy. So all of the cast were unknown. And we got loads of, we did lots of auditions. And the girl who was the casting director, Patsy Pollock, came up with some really good people. And one of them was Sting. Another one was Ray Winston. And virtually every one of those Toya Wilcox, virtually every one of those young guys in that film went on to become really good, renowned actors, And Sting said to me, he said, "I've got a band." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "What they called?" He said, "Police." I said, "Oh." I said, "What label you on?" He said, "I'm on A&M." I said, "Well, the MD of A&M is an old friend of mine, Derek Green." I said, "He's good, He said, "Yeah, well, we released a single and it didn't really work," he said, "but we're talking about releasing another one, or we might re-release that." So I said, "Oh, okay." So just after the film was finished, they re-released the song, and it was Roxanne, and it took off, and
Wow.
he gradually, over a period, became a big star. But the film itself did tremendously.
Legendary film, wasn't it?
Oh, it became a real cult film.
Yeah.
But I took it to America, and in those days, English films were hard to sell over there without any stars, and they wanted to either dub it, because it was all in Cockney accents. They wanted to dub it or subtitle it, which I refused. I refused. And what happened was, and I toured the band, and we, as a support act, an opening act, we didn't have an opening act. What I did was I put up 25 minutes or 20 minutes, a trailer of the movie Quadrophenia. And they were supposed to open, as we finished a concert in the city, they were supposed to open the next day with the movie, because we had already made 10,000 audience. They fucked up. They didn't have it in the cinemas for me, so it didn't have the release it should have had. But then it became very much a slow burner. And over the years, did tremendously well. And still, now and again, it's on TV, and it's a very, it's a cult film.
It is a cult film.